afternoon, everyone. I'm Joe Newmeyer, a film critic for WOR Radio in New York and a creative producer here at the Sarasota Film Festival, and I would like to welcome you to today's career conversation with Greg Kinnear. Let's have a round of applause, please. Thanks so much for being here, Greg. Your film, Phil, is tonight's closing night film. It's the world premiere of your directorial debut.
Oh my gosh, don't bring the room down.
Well, you have, your body of work, I always feel like, has got so much going on with so much complexity and intelligence in comedies and dramas that kind of help us figure out things about ourselves and other people. Tell us about Phil and how that sort of fits in with that a little bit.
Well, this is, it's a movie that I was quite taken with. I'll get into the movie a little bit later, and I want to say thanks to Mark and Sarasota Film Festival for having our movie here. Thank you. And listen, I started in Talk Soup. All right, let's back the clock up, huh? When you're looking at daytime clips of Sally Jesse Raphael and Geraldo, I basically came in through the movie business a very unusual way. I got a lucky break with Sidney Pollack in Sabrina years ago. And I always liked the idea of drama with comedy and comedy with drama. And the mix of that, the humanity of that is what always felt, just felt truthful to me and honest. And so I don't try to embed that into my work. I don't pursue it, but I think it's probably there inherently, and I've tried to keep it interesting like all actors do, and find things that that you're attracted to. And in the case of Phil, Stephen Mazur had written a script that touched on suicide, and that it affected me in my life with a gentleman when I first got into the business. It had taken his own life, and I had other friends who had gone through that. And this movie was strange because it kind of was a life-affirming film that touched on that issue, which I couldn't get around that actually existing. And we worked out a lot of the tone and the beats along the way, but it was great fun, except when I was doing it, in which case I actually wanted to kill myself because it was so much, it was just a lot to do.
We'll get into the nuts and bolts of it in a second, but that sort of brings up something that I've thought about in kind of watching all of your films again and kind of preparing for this, that something about all of your characters and your portrayals feels to me like you're a guy who's understanding these characters like backwards and forwards, what's happened before the film, what's going to happen after. And I think, you mentioned Talk Soup and Later, which we were also great on, the NBC show. And as a broadcast major at the University of Arizona, I feel like there's a lot in there about a guy who understands people, wants to appreciate people's stories, and kind of looking for those nuances and those parts of stories or people's lives that maybe we're overlooking, or maybe that people kind of just zoom past in some ways. Is that a way that you kind of approach characters? You kind of look at them from a sense of, let's kind of understand this guy, even if the story is starting here, I want to understand him from back here and where he's going up to there. Yeah,
I do think about that a lot. My dad is, if my dad were here, he would take each of these questions. He could answer each one of your questions easily in about an hour and a half. He's very thoughtful and he's very detailed, and he just kind of has that ability to. He's fascinated by people and individuals, and I probably have some of that has been passed down. And implying that to characters is, of course, something you try to do as best you can. And it's never a science to me. I didn't go to the Juilliard School of Acting. Don't say we could tell. Do not. Whoever was going to scream that out. So I definitely didn't come from a huge theater background. It was a kind of a strange way in. But there's a sense of finding the human person and the detail and the humanity of an individual that strikes me as job number one for an actor if you're trying to do this. And trying to get that across to an audience is so hard because, I remember working with I think Jack Nicholson, I think, said something like, I think actors bring about 10% to it. The rest of it's just who we are. Yeah. And I like to think I'm at 11%, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. I think some of that's also, you're a Midwestern guy, as am I. You're from Indiana, I'm from Wisconsin. But then also you went to Greece when your dad got stationed over there. And there's an aspect of kind of watching how things are done that I think is kind of part and parcel of being from the Midwest and then also being uprooted to a place completely alien, in a place that you're not prepared for, right? Kind of watching people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear this a lot. I worked with Julianne Moore, who actually gave me a book called, what was it called? Oh, TCK, I think it was, Third Culture Kids. Because we had realized, she had the same background. She had gone to Germany as a kid. Her father, I think, was with the military, and she'd grown up over there. And here somebody had actually written the story about how often, people who have grown up in these cultures, these kind of disenfranchised cultures over there, you do feel slightly, disconnected, and maybe subsequently you're forced to kind of reinvent yourself as you go through your life. And basically, I think there's some truth to that. I've always felt like that was there's some accuracy in that, and you'll meet a lot of actors who grew up in a lot of different places, and so we're frauds.
Well, you also have to read the room in a way, right?
What's that?
You have to learn how to read the room when you're in a situation like that as a kid growing up. You got to kind of feel out what things are going on, what people are like, before you sort of can jump in, right? Yeah,
I mean, I think you listen. I think it's important. Everybody, does that. But I suppose that it's vitally important when you're constantly changing environments and going to new places. So, I was in. I was in Indiana, born in Indiana, lived in Washington, D.C. Then I was in Beirut, Lebanon, as many of you were. And then I was in Athens, Greece, and then graduated high school there before going to college. And so in a very short period of time, and this is kind of interesting. My mom, how everybody has to take a language. You have to study, of course, a language. And my mom thought that at the time that French was the language to study. So I was a displaced kid from Indiana, evacuated from Lebanon, living in Greece, studying French. I speak nothing. I speak absolutely no languages at all. But living in Greece actually has a tie-in to the movie, Phil, because there was an element in this where this character, a dentist, needs to take on a false persona. And the false persona that he inhabits in the movie, written by our writer, our incredible writer, by the way, he wrote Liar, Liar with that great movie with Jim Carrey and so many other films. I mean, he's great. And he had the guy. He was Scottish. What was his name? Hamish. This is Sandy Stern, our producer of Phil, right over here.
Sandy Stern, ladies and gentlemen.
Hamish, right? He was Hamish, and so he was Scottish. And I said to the guys, guys, I can't do a Scottish accent. I can't, and I'm Scottish. But I think I could do a Greek accent, so you'll hear some Greek accenting today.
Had you been thinking about directing for a while? Was there something kind of about this that clicked at the right moment for you, or had it been kind of percolating for a little bit? Yeah,
it had been something that I'd had a couple of close calls. There was a movie, I did a table read with Cuba Gooding one time and on a movie that just didn't come together. There were a couple of things, and they never quite felt right. They never quite coalesced into something where I was like, I feel this, I understand this, and I didn't want to I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it. I mean, it seemed like so much effort, which it was, and so to actually be hugely passionate about it is I think important. So at least with Phil, I felt like a connection enough to fool me to get involved.
Yeah. What about directing yourself? And that always seems to me, whenever I talk to actors who've moved to directing or directors who are acting, and there's obviously this level of remove and that sort of, I'll say almost you have to kind of gauge yourself in some ways because you're obviously both roles. Was that an extra level of difficulty that you maybe weren't anticipating in some ways?
Yeah. It's very, first of all, the role, I don't know, I mean, this was a lot of there's it was a big role in the movie, so it wasn't like I was doing a day playing role for a couple of days. So it was a lot, and I need to pay attention to that stuff. And there were so many other things to kind of keep your eye on at the time. So yeah, it was a little overwhelming, and you do what you can. I mean, we had a stand-in, this great guy who was me, and John Bailey, who had actually I'd worked with. He shot As Good as It Gets, and he's now the president of the Motion Picture Academy. That's what happens when you work with me, folks. I'm just saying, he wasn't before we started working together. And I don't know, we did this, and it just kind of, we would have this stand-in guy who would mimic what I would be doing in the scene, and I would sit back and watch her interacting with Emily Mortimer or Luke Wilson or whoever I was in the scene with, and whatever we were doing, and then we'd kind of adjust the shot, and then we'd go shoot it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a good moment to actually give a shout out to the amazing cast as well. Emily Mortimer and Luke Wilson, Bradley Whitford. Let's have a round of applause for them. Taylor Schilling, Jay Duplass, all co-starring in Phil.
Robert Forster,
that's right.
He's in it too.
What
if he's sitting out here? I mean, like, you can't just rush over.
But that's also part of it, is being the leader. There's sort of obviously the lead actor on a film is sort of the head of the show. Kind of sets the tone in some ways. Kind of being the team leader as a director is another level of leadership that I would imagine was a tricky thing, or at least another level of responsibility to make sure everything flowed through, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And the good. I've worked with Randy Wallace a few times. He wrote Braveheart, and I did a couple of movies with him. And he's the kind of guy that gets out there. I mean, it really turns into a bun rally. He gets everybody amped up, and it's a really valuable thing. And I probably wasn't great at it, just because of the overwhelming nature of it, of kind of getting everybody to hold hands and go through it. And it's also strange because you're shooting, and it's very fragmented, and actors are coming and going and showing up and leaving. So it's an ambitious film for first movie. Yeah.
We're going to talk just a little bit more about it, because I find this stuff kind of fascinating, and I can't wait to see this film. There's obviously amazing performances we want to talk about as well, but I want to kind of talk about, there's a John Cassavetes quote where he talks about, no matter how smart you are, there's a moment when the film sort of announces itself to you. Another, obviously, actor turned director, where you sort of say, oh, that's what it is. This is sort of becoming this. Was there ever a moment like that for you, Greg, where you thought, oh, like whether it could have been either in casting, could have been in editing, could have been a moment where you thought, I thought it was this, but it's a little bit more like that, where the film sort of announced itself to you?
Honestly, not. I mean, I felt like it was really after the process. I mean, I don't think there was time when we were shooting to ever have that great epiphany and to sit back and bathe in the warm water of, oh, we got it, we figured it out. I mean, it just never stopped, and it's such a tricky tone, particularly given the subject matter, that it really. I just wasn't allowed that. I didn't feel, and even through the editing process, there were challenges. But ultimately, it was when it finished, and when I kind of actually had a little distance from it, I was like, "Yeah, I really love that movie." and I remembered. I kind of circled back to why I did it in the first place. But in the middle of it, you're in battle.
I believe it. Yeah. Well, was there any kind of correlation to the night before, the morning of your first day of shooting, that kind of harkened back a little bit to your first night before you shot Sabrina, where you sort of had this sort of moment of like, tomorrow this is going to be this new chapter that I'm going towards? Any kind of correlation to that?
Well. Yeah, I mean, I was aware that obviously that this is something I hadn't done before, painfully aware, and I, was humbled by it, and tried to be respectful. I mean, so many people I've admired had done it and done it really, really well. And I'd gotten some, advice along the way, but at the end of the day, there's nothing that can, really prepare you for it. But yeah, I mean, I was aware that I hadn't done it before. It's something that I'd like to do again. But it's all about finding that story, and stories are really hard, and it's a strange time too for independent cinema. I mean, it's hard to find. So many small movies now are kind of being absorbed into the television spectrum and the streaming world, that independent thing is, it's harder for me to understand what it is. But at the end of the day, it's still the story, the movie, the thing. How's it move us? How's it affect us?
Yeah. We're going to talk about the TV stuff in a little bit too, including House of Cards, which you're amazing on. But one last thing, how about was there a process like the editing? Oh, House of Cards, yes. It's with Diane Lane, who was here 2 years ago with us.
Diane Lane. Robin Wright. Ken. Oh.
And how about the process of finding the composer, of editing the film? Just to wrap up on Phil in that aspect, of the technical aspect to it, because that must have been also something that, looking at the film anew in the editing bay and kind of finding it in some ways, was that a new process for you that really enjoyable?
Yeah. We had David Rosenblum was just such a incredible editor and had done so much. Had done a lot of great films, and he was somebody who I leaned on a lot, just in terms of finding the right tone for the film and kind of pacing, and it went through a lot of different permutations, as these movies do. You try to find your pacing is crazy. I just saw a movie the other day that was 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I thought, I understood this in about 90 minutes. Right. And then there's movies where I feel like, God, I could watch this. I wish this was going for another 20 minutes. It's really tricky finding that kind of sweet spot where the train should arrive at the station, and you don't want it to go too far, and you don't want to stop before the station. You need to land it. Yeah. And kind of finding the nuance in performances, and finding the knowing when to get in and when to get out of a scene. I mean, for anybody who's doing this, or anybody who's pursuing this kind of work, having a good editor is key, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Yeah. So many of your performances kind of mix either an old-fashioned elegance, I feel like, but then there's also this level of sort of modern guys trying to figure things out, along with historical figures, obviously. Do you have a preference for what guy to kind of chew into? Is any of those sort of more fun than others?
Well, I just did. I just got back from London. I just did a movie with Keira Knightley called Misbehaviour. I played Bob Hope. So, in 1970, and that had everything in it. I was like, well, you got a little bit of Bob. You got the 1970s. We're in London. It was really a great experience, and I remember, while I was doing it, I was like, wow, this is it. Speaking kind of to your question, do you ever get? It was just the whole situation was really fun. I will tell you a little side story, and just to show you how dangerous filmmaking can be. We were shooting on a 747. It was the last day of the shoot, and it was about an hour outside of London. It was nighttime, and I needed to use the restroom, as actors sometimes do. You can't use the plane bathroom because it doesn't work. It's basically a set 747. I don't know, they landed it there and you shoot. So I asked the woman if I could run down to my trailer, which was kind of towards the rear of the plane on the tarmac. It was nighttime, it was freezing cold, it was raining, it was England. And she said, listen, I want you to protect your Bob Hope nose and your chin, so can you wear this coat, this kind of warming coat? It's got a big hood over it. And I was like, yeah, sure, I don't care. So I got my Bob Hope outfit on, I got my hood over my thing, I'm running across the tarmac pretty much as fast as I possibly can, because at this point I really got to go. And the next thing I know, I am lying on the ground, covered in blood. Story took a turn there, didn't it? Covered in blood, and my Bob Hope nose is bent to the side of my hair, and I'm looking at my tuxedo, and I'm like, oh, this doesn't seem so good. And I'm looking up at the warm lighted windows of the 747, and I see all the Brits looking down at me, and a PA screams, "Bob's down!" So underneath the wing of the 747 is it's a turbine jet, so it's about eye level. So I had apparently struck that at a pretty good pace,
God.
and So with my nose bent to the side, blood pouring out on my face because I had a cut right over my eye, 10 stitches. I'm okay. The plane's fine. The plane's fine. They take me into the trailer, and the British are all, everybody's just so uncomfortable. The directors, everybody keeps going, would you like a cup of tea? Would you like any tea? And after a while, I'm like, guys, I don't want any tea. I promise you I don't want any tea. I just want to know how we're going to deal with this. And they were very helpful. They got us got me up to a hospital in London, put a little stitch in it, and I survived. I've never told that story. It's the first, other than my wife, who's only hears it once a day.
A lesser-known Bob Hope film, Road to the Hospital, I think, right? There's big moments and small moments in movies, obviously, and in watching so many of your films, I love how you handle the small moments that kind of make the moments big moments. Sabrina, we were just talking about this moment where you take the champagne flutes and kind of put them in your back pockets with a little bit of flourish. In your Oscar-nominated performance in As Good as It Gets, let's have a round of applause for that. There's that quiet moment when you come back from the hospital and you say to Nicholson, can we just go a little easy right now? But there's even moments like in Ghost Town, which I love Ghost Town. And there's this moment where your character, who's a ghost, is constantly looking at his phone, and just the way you put it in your tuxedo pocket says so much about that guy. Just the way you sort of flip it in there. And in Little Men, I know you're going to be working with Ira Sachs again, in Little Men, a beautiful film, there's a scene where your character is crying after putting out some garbage, and it's this gentle sort of comes out of nowhere moment where you really understand everything about that character in just that sort of gentle moment in the shadows of kind of tearing up. When you see those moments in the script, how much preparation do you want to make sure that those small moments get? You want to kind of keep them sort of light? Do you want to keep them sort of to yourself and then bring them out? What's it like for you kind of preparing those small moments?
Yeah, I mean that the little physicality is always great, and sometimes it's there, and sometimes you kind of figure it out with the director and try to find little pieces to add to it. Like I said, since you really are bringing just a limited amount to this, that's part of the 10%. Yeah. I mean that's part of the stuff that you can throw in, and God bless you for noticing. Just to try to cling on to something or give a sense of who this person is to people, because I think it does make the character more familiar to people. We all have our friends and they've all got their things that they do, and you see them and you're like, no, that's kind of interesting, and for better and worse. And I trying to incorporate that is always fun, but it's also a tricky thing because I feel like if you do too much, if I see an affectation of an actor, that's the actor who keeps looking at their watch, then I'm out of the movie. I'm like, well, so it's trying to thread the needle a little bit, but always a fun thing when it gets noticed. So thanks.
Yeah. Was there anything on Phil that kind of reminded you of oh, that's why this director at that time said do this, or why maybe there was something that kind of reminded you you realized as a director now, and you didn't realize then, you're like, this is why something was one way or the other in a previous film or something?
Yeah, most directors, they don't put themselves in the movie. I learned that. I play golf with Doc Rivers, who's the coach of the Clippers, once in a while, and I was talking to him about it. He's like, Greg, there's a reason I don't play basketball anymore. I'm not on the court. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So this is, I don't know. I don't know that there are. I've done 60 or 70 movies, so I definitely have. I've just worked with a lot of great people, been lucky enough to do that. All of them, for every job, it's a learning experience. Every job, you're finding bits and pieces of things that you can bring with you and take into the next thing. So I'm a thief and a charlatan, and have kind of operated that way for years.
We mentioned Ghost Town a couple of minutes ago. By the way, there's a great story that I read that David Koepp, the writer-director, said that he didn't know what visual sort of motif to go for your character, for Frank, and he saw you on a red carpet or something wearing a tuxedo, and it kind of came to him, and he said, this guy is our host. He's the host of the movie. And so that's why you're sort of wearing this tux, because you wear what you die in this great film. And so your character is wearing this tux. I just think it's great. But that film and The Matador remind me sort of the elegance of the duet, the elegance of a two-shot in some ways, kind of throughout not just a one shot that's a two-shot, but throughout the film. In finding that rapport with Pierce Brosnan in the case of The Manatee or Ricky Gervais in the case of Ghost Town, it's so crucial to find that right rhythm with those other actors. And when you feel it click, you kind of feel it kind of slide into that zone, don't you?
Completely, yeah. You can't fake it if you don't like a person. Yeah. And not even like's the wrong word. I kind of like people in general. I've never had one of those experiences that I can't tell you about. I just haven't. I genuinely, all pretty good people. I mean, a few I probably would not put on the top of my list, of course, but I mean, I generally no bad experiences, and I think I've been pretty lucky just in the sense of I mean, whether it's a man or a woman having that kind of chemistry and clicking with somebody and liking them and them liking you, boy, does that go a long way because suddenly you're doing this weird little very personal dance in front of a camera and this kind of intimate thing where you're making yourself vulnerable and trying to do the scene, and you have to trust the person. You got to trust that they're going to be doing what you think they're supposed to be doing, and they need to be you need to be doing what they think. And so I think that goes a long way. I don't know, it's funny because I probably have some great examples too of people where I was like, hey, we click great, and you watch the movie and be like, I don't see it, and I would agree with you. So I don't know that it always works, but it sure is a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Talking about good people and bad people and just extending that to characters. I don't like that sort of line that people say, like, oh, you kind of find the darkness in these certain light characters. I would actually say that some of those characters who maybe are a little edgy, Bob Crane in Autofocus, a couple of other characters.
Just a little.
Just a little. I like that you sort of find the lightness in the dark. I think that there's a level to your performances where you sort of say, to just go with the darkness on this guy and say, isn't this the flip side, is not the interesting way. You kind of, I think just watching it, you go the more interesting way, which is let's try to find something we like about these guys who may or may not. Thin Ice is another one who may or may not necessarily be the best dudes, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't. I don't think I've ever. I haven't played like just a. Just a terrible. I don't think I've played like a terrible villain.
Just getting there a little bit.
Yeah, I was getting there. You're right. We were kind of in the zone there. But I guess he was. But even then, I mean, he's got his agenda. He's got his. I guess it's true that I do try to find that side, that understandable side. It sounds very actory. I want to forgive the character. I don't judge the character. But I just feel like, for me, I want to find something that I can relate to or identify with, and I like liking the character more than I do not liking the character when I do it.
Right. It's like a Dr. Seuss poem. I kind of like that. Let's talk about the keys to the character in another Oscar-nominated film, Little Miss Sunshine. Which is such a terrific film. That film is, that also won Oscars. It's nominated for Oscars, and it's your character, Richard Hoover, is obviously the center of the pivot in the movie. Once Richard sort of at the end of the film kind of goes towards his daughter's side and gets wrapped up in the moment, like, let's go for it. That's our emotional beat. What were some of the keys to him for you? Because he is a striving, wannabe motivational speaker, but he is an everyman in so many ways, isn't he? Yeah.
I loved Richard Hoover. Originally the script, it was a strange thing because it kicked around for a while, and a friend of mine was a producer on it, and they were going to make it, and then it kind of went away, and then like a year later, he said, now listen, we're really going to make it. And I talked to John and Val. They're like, we have to make it because, Abigail's going to be too old. And, she kept getting aging beyond the character. So we kind of all felt like, we got to make this now. She's like perfect. But in that script, originally, Richard Hoover, who I play, was her stepfather. He wasn't her father, and so I had, like, about 3 days before we shot, I had a full-on panic attack, and I said, John, Val, I think this is this is something that we should look at, because I felt like, he's pretty rough on her. And, it's one thing, I like the idea of characters, rough, and, you find the light in him and all that. But there was also, at least in this case, I felt like it was going to be hard to win. If he wasn't her, her father, I felt like it added another layer of something that just felt wrong. And it also made Alan Arkin, my father, her step-grandfather, who was teaching her how to do sexy dance moves for a dance party, which added a whole nother level. Yeah. So we made that change, but I always felt like, I read the script. I liked it. Obviously, it's incredible script. And I was the village idiot because I saw it. I thought it was good, but it really wasn't until we all got together. They'd cast it brilliantly, and we had like a 2-week, I think 10-day rehearsal period, which unfortunately today they don't rehearse for movies nearly as much as they should. It's been I think it's a real, it hurts the movie. It hurts movies that they're not rehearsed more. And in this case, they had a lot of time, and we did weird stuff. We played dodgeball. We went on a road trip in that dangerous van. It's the most dangerous movie I've ever made in my life. I mean, I was like, oh, you want me to just drive? Who's going to drive this? And they were like, you will on the freeway. Yeah. With everybody in the back, just drive. Yeah. So we just kind of winged it, really. And but I did feel like that rehearsal process of us hanging out and getting to know each other and working with one another moved it light years ahead. So that by the time we were shooting, I mean, it really was a family, dysfunctional family, but a family.
Yeah. Did you have a lot of rehearsal time on Phil? What was that like?
Yeah, you would think that would be a perfect time for me to say, that's why I added so much rehearsal time to Phil. No. We didn't have a lot. We had some time built in with Emily Mortimer, who's so wonderful in the movie, and I had some time, and a few of the other actors did get a little bit of time, but not nearly what I would have liked. Blame the producer. But no, I wish we'd had a little bit more time with that. But listen, it's understandable. I say it's a problem for movies, but at the same time, people's schedules are crazy, and it's hard to it's not like we're all shooting in Los Angeles anymore. Right. Pick a city, and that's where it's being made. We didn't even make Phil in the United States, so that's just a reality more and more, which I think adds more and more of a travel burden and a more difficult scheduling burden for productions that try to sync up before you absolutely need them there.
Yeah. It was in Vancouver you guys shot, right? Yeah. And how many days?
I think it was like 30 days, something like that. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that I think that you often feel people say that the speed there is an urgency sometimes to that, and obviously while the rehearsal time would add to that so much more, there is sort of a sense of let's get it, and I think you feel that in some films in a good way. I think you really feel a sense of sort of immediacy to them, right? Yeah, and I think Phil, obviously I can't wait to see it tonight, but I think Phil probably is one that, at least from an emotional level, probably benefits from that in some ways, yeah. Well, I love in Little Miss Sunshine, you're just talking now, there's sort of the level of cajoling that Richard is doing with Olive, talking about the ice cream and things like that. And that's a level of, I think very few actors can sort of get at that sort of everydayness of, the tensions that lie between people. And I think you kind of get at something really great there in that what's going on there is not even so much about Olive, but it's so much about him and that level of, it's reflecting on him, but going towards her, right?
Yeah. No, it was very hard because she's just such a darling girl. And of course I have 3 daughters. So just to sit there and berate my movie daughter for eating ice cream, I haven't let my own children to watch the movie yet. Just it'll scare them.
That one in autofocus, probably just keep away from that, right? Yeah.
Keep them away from autofocus.
Yeah.
Anybody see autofocus out here?
Yeah.
Huh? Really? Yeah. Smattering. That's a smattering of applause.
Yeah. But another great director that you worked with, though, Paul Schrader, in watching these Sidney Pollacks and the James L. Brookses and the Paul Schraders, did you learn things from these guys as you were kind of watching them as you were acting?
Yeah, and I don't feel like there's any Nora Ephron, the great Nora Ephron, who I loved, Gary Marshall, so many great people that I've gotten to work with, and I don't feel like, I mean, yes, to answer your question, do you learn anything? God, yes. I mean, just the way that they, they all drive a different vehicle. Yeah. It's like they all have a different kind of car, but each one is perfect and different than the other one, and you kind of, not everybody directs the same way, not everybody has the same pace, not everybody knows when to, or gives direction the same way, and I don't know, I mean, that's just such a personal thing. It's no different than watching an actor. This actor does it that way, that actor does it that way, but it's something that the great ones, I honestly don't know if I could say honestly that there's a through line for me for the great ones, other than they're terrific listeners. They really, like, if you talk to them, they're wanting to absorb. They want to hear, what's coming around them, and I think that's part of the job is to have a great deal of awareness of what's happening not in the movie, but the set. You've got 200 people to answer to, and it's about listening. Yeah.
You mentioned You've Got Mail and Nora Ephron. I love that character, by the way, because for one thing, it's a certain moment in New York that movie obviously captured. But so does your character Frank is very much a man of that moment. He loves old typewriters. He works for a newspaper. There's sort of there's a 1998-ness to that character that's specific, and that you go back to now, and it's a romantic sort of sense. And I think that the movie is obviously romantic in lots of other ways, but there's things that Nora and in your performance that you find in there that are sort of almost accidentally like beautiful time capsule things of New York at that moment. Do you go back to movies like that and sort of find, like, almost by accident that the zeitgeist it caught was so specific?
Well, that one's weird because you're right. I mean, it really has a big following. Yeah. And, it was 20 years ago, I think. Yeah. And, just when you hear that, You've Got Mail, right. Come on. And Tom Hanks is typing away, and Meg Ryan, and it's... I don't know. It does capture. It was she really loved New York, and it's such a love letter to New York. That movie. It just captures the city so beautifully in kind of a more, I don't know. Maybe I'm being nostalgic. A more innocent time. Not everybody's walking around. Phones were. I don't think there's a cell phone in that movie. Is there? I don't think so. So just that alone makes me go, yeah. Man. You will not see any cell phones in Phil either, by the way.
That's good. No cell phones.
Actually, there is a cell phone. Sorry, no, there is a cell phone. Sorry. That's right. But at any rate, so that movie definitely had a wonderful feel to it, and if you're a lover of New York, you have to see it.
Yeah. And obviously that sort of character that you have in there is so specific to that era. But he's also he in his of himself sort of represents New York in a lot of ways. Yeah. Television has offered lots of great things for you. Let's start with the Kennedys, an Emmy-nominated performance as John F. Kennedy. What I like is that there's you can be facing down Jack Nicholson at one point in a movie, but to sort of have the quietness as you're facing down the Cuban Missile Crisis is a whole other thing. And there's a level of quietude that you bring to this performance that we haven't seen in other performances of John F. Kennedy. What were some of the things that you wanted to make sure were sort of in that performance in subtle ways?
Well, there's obviously a lot to read. There's, the internet is a wonderful tool for any actor today. You can find, hours and reams of documented stuff to kind of study and to look at, and I guess his. There is. It strikes me as a real loneliness in that job, and I felt with him that his isolation at that time, even though his brother, played beautifully by Barry Pepper, by the way, is there. I did feel like he was deeply isolated, and really I think the stakes, at least as we told the story, it was dealing with all of the key moments of his presidency. So obviously it was all fairly crisis-based. Yeah. But I do find that there was of course, there's the sound of him. And it's always a tricky thing when you're playing a real life person. And I've done this, a few times, and it's, you're pursuing a sound. I'm not going to be him. This is never going to happen, and yet you're trying to give the audience something to hang on to. And if you push too much, and if you're too literal, I think you lose people. And at the same time, if you go too modest with the affectation, then I think that's also a problem. So it's trying to find that middle zone, or just saying I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I've seen great actors who just say I'm not. I know that I'm playing Richard Nixon, but I'm just going to talk like this, and that is perfectly. That's a choice, but. I guess it's there's no one size fits all, but it's try to find whatever works best with what you're doing. And with him, it was just trying to find. After the hair people got done with me, some sense of his moment in those crises.
Yeah, what I see in that performance and seeing it again is sort of there's slight levels of almost naivete, of sort of feeling almost a little bit like going behind that desk and maybe not necessarily sure what needs to be done, and physical pain a little bit, like just a slight wince. That sort of notion of this was a guy who couldn't stand for 10 minutes.
That's right.
Because of his back pain, because of the Addison.
Yeah, the amount of pain, which was something I was unaware of. Was just it was excruciating, and it was something that plagued him, his whole life, even as a child, and so that. And by the way, it causes you pain to play pain. I can tell you, it really, like, my back was so bad after that movie, and I don't know why. Honestly, I just was like. I was really gimped out after that, and I think it was just the stress of trying to carry that, and his walk, and there was always a sense that it was, he was feeling that, was something that was kind of. I don't know, one of the pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah. Does that happen a lot with you? Do you kind of feel like, even at the end of the day, you're kind of feeling the performance in some ways? It can be physically, it can be mentally, where you kind of walk away and you're like, what, this is one that's kind of hard to shake, or even in a good way, you're like, I'm thinking about it in so many different ways. It's taking up a lot of my brain time.
Yeah, I don't tend to, bring it home with me. I really don't, but I do feel like, when I'm there and when I feel like when I am hanging on to something that I kind of feel like, oh yeah, I got some little area here to tag on to. It makes the job, more challenging and better. Yeah. I feel like it makes it better, but it's not always the case. I mean, there are jobs where you do the best you can with what you have, but I don't know. It helps.
Yeah. We're talking about pain, and let's talk about House of Cards now, because you and Diane, as Annette and Bill Shepard, are such a pain for Claire. I think, John, like that little segue was like,
wow.
You gotta keep them awake. What was the sort of the key? These guys are zillionaire. If you guys haven't, it's amazing. These zillionaire sort of industrialists who are really kind of putting pressure on Claire to kind of get their agendas across. As you kind of sat down and looked at that character, what were some of the things that came across to you that maybe were really either juicy or fun, or something you weren't anticipating about this final season of the show?
Working with Diane Lane, that was kind of the top of the list. I was so excited to do that, obviously, and Robin was, wonderful, and obviously a strange experience in the sense that I was shooting a movie. I was shooting a movie in Memphis with actually Tom Shadyac, and we were finishing that film, and I was going up to Baltimore to start House of Cards, and I went up, and I think I shot the first day, like a scene or two. Obviously I'd met Diane before, but it was all great, and I liked, and I'll talk about the character. They were kind of based. The Shepherds are kind of based on the Koch brothers, was kind of the idea behind that, and just power and control and trying to, wreak havoc in the White House. But I went to Baltimore and we shot for a day, and then I came back, I think, to Memphis, and I got a text from Diane saying, "I'm not sure, are we doing this?" And I was like, "What?" And of course, I turned on CNN, and of course, there was a number of breaking news alerts about one of the actors in the show, and it got crazy. So they shut down. And the writers had to actually go and reconfigure very quickly. And I've said, great respect to Netflix. They paid this crew to hang on. They paid the actors, to kind of sit tight. It took a little while, but they managed to very quickly kind of put that together and kind of collectively end the show. And so, unlike they had 10 scripts written when we started that, and all those had to be burned to the ground and start all over again because suddenly you've lost Kevin. And it was really like things changed a lot. So it turned from being like this job that I was, like, oh, here's the scripts, here's what we're going to do, I've got it, to wow, we're back up in Baltimore. They're writing episode 3. We're shooting episode 2, and it was a little chaotic. But I thought they did a really good job of landing the integrity. It was a great show. I felt like they still landed that, and ultimately. Having Robin in that last season as the president was kind of a cool thing. So it ultimately worked out, but it was great fun to do. It's weird. House of Cards is such an iconic show, and that you're suddenly in it. I mean, like being there in the White. I mean, it was like a movie in a movie. I felt like, is this really? Yeah, this is House of Cards, right? Yeah. Okay. So I stepped into my television and was acting. Yeah.
It's like a Twilight Zone, which you also have the Twilight Zone episode that's coming up.
These segues of yours are getting crazy.
I know, kind of too much, isn't it? But talk about filming the Twilight Zone. It's coming up, obviously. This is a big, CBS Access reboot that's coming up. Talk about that episode and the fun of it.
Right? Great. Jordan Peele decided to go. Jordan Peele can pretty much do anything he wants right now, and he just had his other movie hit huge, and he's a wonderful guy, and he created. Sort of a new version of the Twilight Zone. So it's, I guess, 8 episodes or 10 episodes. So yes, I went up and did one and worked with a great actor named Stephen Yeun, who you might know from a little movie called Burning last year. Yep. And he's wonderful. And we basically... I think it was a new script. It's not a remake, version of what had already been done in the Twilight Zone. It's a fresh version, but I felt like it was told in a really smart way. Wonderful characters. It takes place in Eglak, Alaska, at this kind of refuge, kind of this outpost in Alaska. And in this small town, they're celebrating Christmas Eve, and suddenly, someone has shown up in their prison cell. A man showed up in their prison cell, and nobody knows how he got in there. That's the setup. And it's pretty creepy. Yeah,
it looks a little like Bad Day at Black Rock in some ways, like the trailer for it, like the Spencer Tracy film in some ways. We're going to take some questions from the audience in just one moment, but I want to talk about playing an actor, which you did in Little Men, and it's not a big part of that character, but it is sort of this crucial moment. And it was interesting to see.
On Nurse Betty, I played an actor.
Oh, that's right, you did. Oh, that's right, Nurse Betty, you did.
I play actors all the time.
That's right. That's right. An actor playing actors. There's that level of sort of, obviously it's meta, but it's also sort of that level where you kind of want to scale it back, but also you probably want to play it up a little bit, right? In terms of playing an actor. What's the trick to that? Is there little edges? Obviously, every script is different. That sort of requires
just
that.
Act insecure and needy. It's pretty... No. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what what the job is. I mean, Ira Sachs is a wonderful director from New York and had done this movie Little Men. And actually, we just did a shot in Portugal, a film called Frankie with Isabelle Humbert and Marissa Tomei and Brendan Gleeson. It's a wonderful, wonderful film that will be out shortly, and so I don't know. There was just that actor was it was interesting. He was really he was a real guy. He was just kind of on the edge, and maybe he's doing okay, but maybe he's not doing okay, and just trying to find those colors and shades of not knowing what's happening day to day, which is not that hard for me to actually. It's kind of in my sweet spot. If you want to know the truth.
Yeah, I actually like that character. Like it sort of shows acting being it's a, as you say, it's a day-to-day thing. It's a job he does. He's putting food on the table for his family. But there's small little dilemmas that he has to go through in terms of what's the next step. Is this going to be a Broadway play? I thought we were going to do that kind of thing. Yeah, there's lots of interesting elements to that and levels. Yeah. If anybody has any questions, shoot up a hand. We can repeat the question back. Yes, questions about The Gift, the Sam Raimi film.
The Gift was. I believe I killed Katie Holmes, who ended up playing Jacqueline Onassis. So she always has a tough time with me when we're working together. The Gift was a wonderful film. Sam Raimi, who became a real good friend of me and my wife, for many years now, directed that film. He had just done. What was the film he had done?
I think Spider-Man?
No, it was the small one.
Oh, right.
With,
it's with Billy Bob Thornton.
Simple Plan!
That's it, Simple Plan. Thank you.
Okay, it was called Simple Plan. And at any rate, he had just done that. He did this small little film that we shot down in Savannah. But it was really, really a cool movie. Great ensemble cast: Hilary Swank, Keanu Reeves, Cate Blanchett. I mean, it was a crazy cast, and it had a real sense to it. I mean, it really did. It has a very clear feel. I mean, he takes you into that bayou and that place down there, and nobody does spooky like Sam. And while we were down there, it was announced, of course, that he's suddenly going to do a little movie called Spider-Man. So I'd see him every morning down at the breakfast spot, and I'd be like, "Hey, Sam, what's happening?" Didn't go my way, folks.
Next question. There was a couple of hands. I want to make sure we get everybody. Sorry. Yes. I don't think we're going to get better than that in terms of audience questions. I'm going to wrap up, Greg, by asking what part of the film, not the character, but what part of film is the most reflective of you, that reflects you the most, you think, in some ways?
I guess the search. There's a search. It's a mystery. In a way, it's a kind of life-affirming mystery, I think, of the movie as. And I think there's it asks this big question, why? And I am fond of that question, why? And I find I ask that about a lot of things. Yeah. And I'm curious, and I have I think a real curiosity about a lot of things. So maybe that. It's as simple as that. Yeah, it shows up in so much of your work. Can't wait to see it in film. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Kinnear, thank you so much for being here with us. Thanks.